Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chabura. Whether you're here live or catching the recording on YouTube or podcast, we are pleased to begin our new Monday night public series. Now, some quick housekeeping. Our friends at Darts Press have published their latest book, Understanding Peshat. It is a new annotated translation of Ibn Ezra's introduction to his Torah commentary. You can find it on Amazon if you search Understanding Peshat. Moving on to tonight, for 3 weeks, we'll be exploring the relevance and meaning behind the Mishkan and Korbanot. To help us do this, we have none other than Freddie Grunsfeld. Freddie Grunsfeld is a student of the Habura and an IDF soldier based in Alon Shavot. Born in the Syrian Sephardic community of Brooklyn, he made Aliyah to study at Yeshivat Har Etzion. After a year in the Armored Corps, he now serves as an intelligence NCO. Freddie also studies and teaches Mikra and Halacha according to the Sephardi tradition. Freddie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a big zechut and honor to be here. Let me share my screen. Yes, I can. Okay, before we actually get into what I want to speak about tonight, which is the Mishkan, I want to give a brief introduction to a general methodology when studying Tanakh that we'll be using here in these shiurim, in these haburot. And that is, at least when I study Mikra, there are really 3 questions that I like to ask when I approach any text of the Mikra. The first is, what is the matara? What is the agenda of the text? The second is, what is the mahut? What is, there in any given text, there are certain ambiguities and there are certain questions that need to be answered in order to more properly understand the text. And the third question is regarding the hatzaga, the presentation of the text, right? Those are literary questions. So again, matara, the agenda of the text, the mahut of a text, and the hatzaga of a text. So these are 3 questions that tonight I will not be addressing all of them. Tonight I just want to be addressing them. I hope to address at least some of the matarot of the Mishkan and discuss different perspectives and perspective that I prefer in this topic. And hopefully in later series we'll address the other 2 questions. Okay, so if we're talking about the Mishkan, obviously we have to start with Parashat Teruma. Parashat Teruma is the introduction to Parashiot Mishkan, which is Shemot 25, really until the end of the Sefer, right? So if we're reading the Pesukim, Daber Adonai Moshe lemor, Daber el Bnei Israel, v'kol li Teruma, v'et kol ish asher yidber libo, v'kol Terumati. And then skipping to the end of the introduction, right? So we have this command from God that God tells Moshe to tell Bnei Israel to collect terumot, to collect donations, so that they can build the Mishkan. Now, again, like I just mentioned, when we have this instruction, what I want to discuss tonight is what is the point of this Mishkan. And there are a few different perspectives that I want to address, and like I mentioned before, I have my own perspective that I think is most fitting. Okay, so the first perspective I want to discuss basically argues that the purpose of the Mishkan, at least on its most fundamental level, is to house the luchot. Right, you have the luchot berit. These are the tablets that were given that have on them the Aseret Devarim, the 10 Commandments, 10 statements. Those, you need to put them somewhere. So you put them in an aron, you put them in an ark, and the ark needs to go somewhere as well. So you put those in a mishkan. So if we're looking at can you all see the screen I'm sharing? Okay. So Shemot Kafhet Ele Pekudei Mishkan, right? This is the beginning of Parashat Pekudei Mishkan Ha'edut Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe Avodat Halviyim B'Yad Itamar Ben Aharon HaKohen. So the Mishkan is called Mishkan Ha'edut. So if the Mishkan is called Mishkan Ha'edut, right? That obviously refers to luchot ha'edut. So when you call something by such a name, it obviously, right, like Ibn Azar here says, Mishkan ha'edut, hem haluchot. So if the Mishkan is characterized, is called by the word edut, it would imply that its primary purpose is to house these luchot, and that is telling on to the general matara, so to speak, of the Mishkan. Further, Ibn Azar in the second page on Shemot, למה נקרא משכן? בעבור הארון ששם לוחות העדות. והנה אחז דרך חסריו, וזהו האמת בעבור מכתב אלוהים. So again, Ibn Azra further states that why is it called Mishkan? Because what is really shochen inside of the Mishkan? The Aron. And what's in the Aron? Luchot העדות. Right. Similar lines, you have Shadal also in the same Pesukim in Pekudeh, Mishkan Ha'edut, מלשון ארון העדות, עניין תורה, והמשכן כולו נקרא על שם לוחות העדות וארון העדות, כי הם עיקר הקדושה. לעלות תראה למעלה ויקחו לתרמה ועשו למקדש, ומיד עשו ארון. Shadal points out that the first instruction that's brought after the original instruction of God to build the Mishkan is the Aron, and that would imply that the primary purpose of the Mishkan or the Mikdash later on would be a place to house the Luchot HaBerit. More support for this approach we could find in Devarim. Right, I'll explain why. I'll read the Pesukim. בעת ההיא אמר אדוני אלי, פסול לך שני לוחות אבנים כראשונים, ועלה עלי ההרה, ועשית לך ארון עץ. So Moshe is telling the story to Bnei Israel, and he says, God told me, right? This is after Hita Egel. God told me to, create luchot like they were originally and put them in an ark of wood. V'chtov ala luchot devarim asher hayu ala luchot harishonim asher shiparta v'samtam ba'aron. Right, write everything like they were originally and put it in the ark. Ve'as Aron aseh shetim v'psol shne luchot avarim karishonim v'al hahara u'shne luchot beyadai. Sorry. Here it seems, right, the first mention of the Aron in Sefer Devarim is as a place to put the luchot. It's not really mentioned in a more broad ritual sense of, sacrifice really isn't mentioned here. It almost seems that the Aron has an independent purpose of being a place to store the luchot, and therefore it would make sense that you once we're putting it in an Aron, you can't just have the Aron nowhere, so you have to build a Mishkan to put this Aron inside of it, like we mentioned before. What I'm saying here is not just something we can find in the Torah. I brought here in source 6 a text that's found, a treaty of a Hittite treaty. I'll read it in English, right? This document is made in 7 copies, right? This document is the document that's summarizing a vassal covenant. And is sealed with the seal of the sun goddess of the Arina and the seal of the storm god of Hati. 1 tablet is deposited in the presence of the sun goddess of Arina, 1 tablet in the presence of the storm god of Hati, 1 tablet in the presence of Liwani, 1 tablet in the presence of Hibat, right? And the point is that when you have these temples, you put the tablets that are basically summarizing the covenant in the temples of the different deities of the people that are engaging in covenant. The suggestion would be that similarly, the Torah is using a similar framework, a similar structure, which is that God and Israel engage in covenant. The luchot are the text of that covenant, and that covenant and that text needs to be placed in a temple, and that is what the Mishkan would be. I brought here Rashi and the Ramban, but because we don't have so much time, I want to skip onto Annette, right? So just to summarize what we just suggested now is that really that the Mishkan, the primary purpose of the Mishkan would be a place to house the Aron, which contains the luchot. If that is so, the question that you would need to ask is, okay, fine. So so why not just have Kodesh Kodashim, right? We have the Kodesh and we have the Haser. In the Kodesh we have a Shulchan, we have a menorah, we have a Mizbah HaKetoret. In the Haser we have Mizbah HaNechoshet. We have a whole sacrificial rite that also happens in the Mishkan. So if the primary purpose is to house the luchot, we also have to answer the question according to this approach: what is the sacrificial rite doing in the place of the place in which we house the luchot? That question I want to save for the end of our time tonight. I want to move on to a second approach, that the primary purpose isn't to house the luchot, but rather, so to speak, to house the Shekhinah. Right? Reading the Pesukim we mentioned before in the beginning of Terumah, v'asu mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Also in that same perek, in the bolded part of the next of source 2 here, v'nodati lecha shama v'dibarti etecha me'al hakaporet ben shnei hakerubim asher al aron ha'edut et kol asher al saveh otecha el bnei Israel. So here we see also that seems like the primary purpose of the Mishkan here. You do a Mishkan. Why? So I could be shochen in them. What does it mean in them is a question. I think the peshat of that pasuk would be betocham. Why? Because you see the mahaneh, and the center of the mahaneh is the Mishkan. So betocham refers to mahaneh Israel. But nonetheless, the point of the Mikdash is to have the Shekhinah be in them, in mahaneh Israel. How is that done? It's done by having Mishkan in the middle of the Mahaneh. Another term besides for Shekhinah is also the word we found in the second source is Venodati. That's going to be an important term that we're going to address later. So again, this second approach would be saying that the main purpose of a Mishkan is to have a place for which there could be, right, Mishkan, Mishkan Shekhinah, so that there can be a place to have the Shekhinah, have the Hiva'adut of God in Israel. שמות כ"ט, עולה תמיד לדורותיכם פתח אוהל מועד לפני אדוני אשר יבעד לכם. שמה לדבר אליך שם. ונודעתי שמה לבני ישראל ונקדש בכבודי. That's the summary of the legislation for the Mishkan. And the summary is that there should be a place of meeting. There should be, right? Why meeting? Because, so to speak, this is, again, I'm obviously using metaphorical terms here. This is God's house, and God invites Israel into his house, and there is a point of meeting. So you have God Shekhinah, God besides for the Shekhinah, God invites Israel to come into the place of the Shekhinah, and there you have Hiva'adut between God and Israel. Important source to look for this approach is, of course, going to be Ramban Nachmani. Reading here, והנה עיקר החפץ במשכן הוא מקום מנוחת השכינה שהוא הארון כמו שאמר, right? So here it's interesting because the Ramban is similarly to the first approach is saying that the ikar of the Mishkan is the Aron. It's kind of hard to get out of that, but not the Aron as it is holding the luhot, but the Aron as really he kind of means the kaporet and the keruvim, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. שהוא ארון, כמו שאמר ונודעתי לך שם ודיברתי איתך מעל הכפורת, על כן הקדים הארון והכפורת בכאן, כי הוא מוקדן במעלה, ושמח לארון השולחן והמנורה שהם כלים כמוהו, ויראו על עניין המשכן שבעבורם נעשה. וסוד המשכן הוא שיהיה הכבוד אשר שכן על הר סיני, שוכן עליו בנסתר. And here is the thesis of Ramban, very famous thesis, that the Mishkan is really a continuation of Ma'amad Har Sinai. The Ramban very convincingly here brings a lot of parallels that you could find between the descriptions that we find in Sinai and the descriptions that we find in the Mishkan. I don't want to go through all of them now, but you could read them, and I think it's rather convincing. And therefore, he says the main purpose of the Mishkan, like we had the Anan being Shochen al Har Sinai, now the Kavod, the Shekhinah, is going to be Shochen in the Mishkan amongst Israel, because Israel isn't going to stay near Sinai forever. They're going to continue in their travels. They're going to come into Israel, and therefore, in order to continue Ma'amad Har Sinai, we create a Mishkan, and this Mishkan is going to contain the Shekhinah, and we'll go with Israel wherever they go. More from Ramban in another text, not his Perush Torah, but his Dirashot. Okay, so here's the point that we discussed before. Whether we said, like approach one, that the point of the Mishkan is to house the Luchot, whether we say like approach two, that we're discussing now, the point of the Mishkan is to have a Shekhinah inside of Israel, you have to then address, why do we have Korbanot in the same structure, right? So here the Ramban is addressing this question. Excuse me. Here the Ramban is arguing that the korbanot are really a method for bringing about the Shekhinah. Right? Right? Last week's parasha, we saw that after Aharon completed all the sacrificial rite, then he does the beracha, then Moshe and Aharon go back to the Mishkan, then Moshe and Aharon say a beracha, and then Vatese Esh Vatochal Vayira Kevod Hashem. So Ramban's argument here is that, like he argues, the main purpose of the Mishkan would be the Shekhinah. If so, why Korbanot in the same structure? Because the Korbanot, in one way or another, allow for Shekhinah. Now, when we say allow for, there are really two ways we could discuss this. One is a more mechanistic, metaphysical approach, which is that, and this might be what Ramban is referring to, that for some, I'm not familiar enough with Nachmanidian metaphysics, but for some reason or another, korbanot allow for the Shekhinah to come down. If you look in Shemot Lamed, when he's discussing this Bahar Ketoret, he addresses this more robustly, but I don't want to get into this now. You don't need to take this metaphysical approach, this mechanistic approach, really, the korbanot are, so to speak, bring down the Shekhinah, but rather the korbanot are what allow or what causes God, right? Not cause in a technical sense, cause what creates the reality in which God will be Shoresh Shekhinah, not for a mechanistic reason, but because the korbanot are an avodah, and if you are creating a makom avodah, there is where God is going to be Shoresh Shekhinah. Either way, Ramban is clearly taking the approach that the purpose of the Mishkan here is to have a place for Shekhinah, and the Korbanot are a means to an ends to get that Shekhinah. You could find similar things in the Bechor Shor, as well as in Kasuto, who is a much later source. So that's Adkan for source 2. Not source 2, approach 2. Approach 2 again is that the primary purpose of the Mishkan is to create a place in which there could be the Shekhinah amongst Israel. And like in approach 1, we have the question of, so then why Korbanot as well? And Haramban addressed that. Okay, now the third approach. By the way, I'm going to try to share this source sheet because there's a lot of sources. I have a lot of sources here that I'm not going to read inside, but I think they're worthwhile to read, not during this time. So I'm going to try to share that when I'm done. Here's the third approach. The third approach is that the fundamental purpose of the Mishkan is a makom avodah, that Israel need a place to worship God through ritual, and the Torah, allows that to happen in a particular place, and that is the purpose of the Mishkan. This really is usually identified with Harambam. We could discuss, if we have time, whether this is really an accurate presentation of Harambam or not. So I'll read from you from Sefer HaMizvot. The 20th מצוות עשה היא שציוונו לבנות בית הבחירה לעבודה, בו יהיה הקרבה והבערת האש תמיד, ואליו תהיה הליכה ועלייה לרגל והכיבוס בכל שנה, והוא אומרו יתעלה ועשו לי מקדש, בלשון ספרי. 3 מצוות אסתרו ישראל בעת כניסתם לארץ, למנות להם מלך, למנות להם בית הבחירה, ולהכרית זרעו של עמלק. הנה נתבאר שבעניין בית הבחירה מצווה בפני עצמו. Similarly, Harambam writes in the first halacha in Bet Bechira, מצוות עשה לעשות בית להשם, מוכן להיות מקריבים עליו הקורבנות וחוגגים אליו 3 פעמים בשנה, שנאמר ועשו למקדש, וכבר נתפרש בתורה, משכן שעשה משה רבנו, והיה לפי שעה, שנאמר כי לא באתם עד עתה. So Harambam here similarly writes, as he did in Sefer Mitzvot, that there is a mitzvah ta'aseh to create a place of worship that is mukhan, that is prepared, that is ra'ui. Its purpose is to it's prepared to have there be a sacrificial service, and that is the ikar of the mitzvah. Now, it's often phrased, in the Ulama Yeshivot, if, you'll hear a Devar Torah, that there's really mahloket Haramban and Rambam. Haramban says the purpose is to have a Shekhinah, and Harambam's purpose is to have the Avodah. I'm not so convinced that that's really true. Because if we're discussing in terms of the mitzvah, you can't say it's a mitzvah to have the Shekhinah, because it's not really Israel's choice whether to be Shoreh Shekhinah. If God wants to be Shoreh Shekhinah, that's God's choice. The mitzvah, the actual action that Israel is commanded to do is to build this bait. Now, that being said, Harambam could have written Misvat Aseh La'asot Bait La'Shem Muchan Le'Hashrat HaShekhinah. So he could have written that. Nonetheless, I think there is room for Histakut. There is room for us to be a little weary when we suggest this is Harambam's approach. I'm flying through here because I really want to get to the second part of it. So anyway, we're in the fourth approach. The fourth approach, which really has 2 sub-approaches in it, is that it's a teguvah leheta egel, right? This is very famous. This is Rashi. This is different approaches in Hazal throughout rabbinic literature, classic rabbinic literature. Here I'll read for you from the Tanakh. ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם. מתי נאמר למשה הפרשה הזו של משכן ביום הכיפורים עצמו, אף על פי שפרשת המשכן קודם מעשה העגל. אמר ביהודה ברבי שלום, אין מוקדם ומאוחר בתורה, שנאמר נעו מעגלותיה לא תדע. Right. I'm skipping Haveh b'Yom Kippurim. Ne'emar l'Moshe v'asu l'mikdash minayin. Why do we say that? Sheken ala Moshe b'shisha b'Sivan v'asa 40 yom ו40 לילה ועוד עשה 40 ועוד עשה 40 הרי 120 ואתה מוסר שביום הכיפורים נתכפר להם ובו ביום אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם כדי שידעו כל האומות שנתכפר להם על מעשה העגל. ולכך נקרא משכן העדות שהוא עדות לכל בעולם שהקדוש ברוך הוא שוכן במקדשכם. Okay. Quickly to summarize what we just read in the Tanakh, we're saying here that it's a teguvah to the egel in such that it's edut, it's testimony to the fact that God has forgiven Israel for the sin of Heta Egel. We'll see further that there's another approach that we could find that's also teguvah to Heta Egel, but not that it's testimony to the fact that not that it's testimony to the fact that God forgave Israel for the egel, but it's rather a tikkun for Maaseh Egel atzmo. Almost, on the timeline, yes, I'm speaking a little bit sarcastically here, but on the timeline, we would say that in the first model we just read here, you have Heta Egel, then you have the Kapara, then God forgave, and then he said, okay, build the Mishkan as an edut that I forgave you. And the second model would be the opposite. You have the Heta Egel, and then you have the Mishkan, and through the Mishkan, there's Kapara for Heta Egel. Like in the all right. In this midrash, which is really also found in Masechet Shekalim in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yosef ben Hanina Omer, "Ve'asita kaporet zahav tahor, yavo zahav kaporet ve'chaper al zahav egel." The point of this approach would be to say that the not that it's a teguvah in that it's due to the fact that God has forgiven Israel for what has been done, rather that this zahav is coming to be mechaper on that zahav. This approach we're going to address more in arichut after we get to this final approach, because this final approach is really building on that. The final approach that we're going to be discussing here tonight is that there's really shnei shelavim in the sivui of the Mishkan. That there's a Mishkan that was commanded, that was legislated before Heta Egel, and there was also a Mishkan that was, additional aspects of the Mishkan that were added after and in light in response to Heta Egel. And this can first be really seen from Abarbanel. Now, I didn't bring you the Pesukim from Yirmiyah, which I think are kind of important that I show you why Abarbanel is saying it over there in Yirmiyah. Can I show you? Okay. You guys see where I'm going? You see that I'm opening up Yirmiyah? Yeah. Okay. So Yirmiyah in Perek Zayin is really giving tochaha to the nation and addresses korbanot over there. Right in Pasuk Kaf Aleph, Ko Amar Adonai Sevaot Elohei Yisrael, Olotechem sefu al zivchechem veichlu basar. Stop bringing zevachim, eat the meat. Ki lo dibarti tavotechem velo sivitim beyom הוסיעי אותם מארץ מצרים על דברי עולה וזבח. כי את הדבר הזה ציוויתי אותם לאמור שמעו בקולי והייתי לכם לאלוהים ואתם תהיו לי לעם והלכתם בכל הדרך אשר אסווה אתכם למען ייטב לכם. This is haftarah for Parashat Tzav, right? So here, right, whenever you read this, obviously you have a reti'ah to ahor. You have you're taken aback because it's kind of weird for Yirmiyah to say, for God to say that I did not command divrei olah v'zavah. We have Sefer Vayikra. Hopefully, we'll study that in the future. And indeed, God was mesaveh divrei olah v'zavah. And this is what prompts the Abarbanel we're going to read to give the following answer. We're back here in the Abarbanel. Yeah. Okay. ולכן הנראה בפירוש הפסוק הוא שהנה ישראל כשיצאו ממצרים ובאו לפני הר סיני ושמעו התורה והמצוות לא סיבם השם דבר מעניין הקורבנות אבל סיבם ענייני האמונות והמעשים המשובחים אשר יעשו. האומנם כאשר עשו העגל וראה השם יתברך ששרירות ליבם הרע ובכל יום ויום יחטאו לפניו הוסרח לתקן להם תור ורפואה למחלתם ורשעיהם, ולכן באו מצוות הקורבנות מהעולות אשר יעשו לכפר על הרהורי ליבם מחטאת והאשם ושאר מיני הקורבנות כולם שלא נסתוו עליהם אלו לא היו חוטאים. וזהו אומרו כאן כי לא דיברתי את אבותיכם ולא ציוויתים ביום הוציאי אותם מארץ מצרים רומז למעמד הר סיני. So here Abarbanel is answering the question of how could God say lo siviti al divrei olah v'zavach. Because, originally there was no legislation for korbanot, and the korbanot was only in response to certain events that took place after Ma'amad Har Sinai. Now, Abarbanel is saying this really not in response to our text, meaning Parashiot HaMishkan. Abarbanel is saying this in response to a kushiyah in Yirmiyah. But I think there really is room to say this, not in response just to Yirmiyah, but really from the peshat of the Pesukim. I want to bring this out really, and this is what I want to spend most of the rest of our time on, through the following sources. Now, when I'm presenting here now the Masoretic text as well as the text of the Torah, so to speak, as the Shomronim, the Sumerians have it. Now, when I'm presenting this text, it's not because I have any hashash that the Samaritan text is correct. But very often when we have difficulties in texts, there are later scribes that try to, quote unquote, fix the text. They notice a problem and they try to fix the text. And very often, if you look at the later texts that are, quote unquote, fixed, some scholars will tell you, oh, really, our text, had a scribal error. But I think the more wise approach is no, that the text that makes more sense is the text with that was doctored, and the text that has more tension is a text that was left alone. So here, if we're talking about now two shilavim in the sivui for the Mishkan, I don't think there's any better place to go than to go to what we have in our Torah in Shemot Perek Lamed, or what we have in the Nosach HaShomrani in Perek Kaf Vav. Right. So in our Masoretic text, we have ושמת את השולחן מחוץ לפרוכת ואת המנורה נוכח השולחן על סלע המשכן תימנה והשולחן תיתן, על סלע הצפון, ועשית מסך לפתח האוהל תחת בארגמן ותורת שנים ושש מוזר מעשה רוקם. Okay, that's our text. However, in the text of the Samaritan Torah, we have the entire parashiyah that we find in our Torah in Shemot Perek Lamed, here inserted in Shemot Perek Kavav. Right? If you see here, I brought a chart for you that shows you Pasuk Lamed Hen Lamed Vav in our text and Pasuk Lamed Hen Lamed Vav in their text. They don't really call it Lamed Hen Lamed Vav because they don't have the breakdown of the Perakim, but I just put it there to make it clear. So we have V'samta et HaShulchan like we have here, and then instead of ועשית מסך, ועשית מזבח, מקטר קטורת, עשה שיטין תעשה אותו, אמר אורכו וכו'. You have the entirety of the מזבח הקטורת, in theory where it really should be. It would make a lot of sense for מזבח מקטר קטורת. This is the מזבח that's in the Kodesh. It's a keli like any other keli, so presumably. Yet in our Torah, it's not found until Shemot Lamed. Computer. Right. I should have showed you actually not just Lamed, I should have showed you Kaftet first. Why? Because you could see, actually, I have it on my source sheet already. I showed you Kaftet. Anyway, Kaftet is you have the summary of the Parashiot HaMishkan. Right? V'kidashti et oil moed v'et hamizbeach v'et aharon b'nav v'kadesh lechahen li. You have that envelope of ending in memhe of kaftet v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Israel. That is a classic way for the Torah to end a section. Again, this is, if we could ever find a conclusion of a section of the Torah, this is what it would look like. Yet, right after that, seemingly, very, very surprisingly, after we just had a conclusion of all the kelim of the Mishkan, we find in Shemot Lamed, which is very strange. Now, this is really getting into the last question what we discussed in the beginning, that whenever I'm approaching a text, I want to address the matara, the mahut, and the hatzaga. This is really in the hatzaga, but because it's relevant to the mahut, I'm going to speak about this now and not later. So again, just to go over the question, why on earth would the Mizbach HaKetoret be presented after the summary of the Mishkan? Again, if we're bringing back to the conversation we're having in terms of Shnei Shelavim, I think the answer is mitbakesh. I think where I'm getting at is obvious, that you have, you have the first Shelav, which is X, and you have Y, and you have the summary, and then you have Y. I hope that's clear. I don't think that the Mizbach HaKetoret, again, if it's not obvious, what I'm suggesting here is the Mizbach HaKetoret is coming in response to the Chet HaEgel. It's a second Shelav in the Sivoy for the Mishkan. Now, I don't think this is the only thing that's a response to the Sivoy of the Mishkan, and I'm going to address in a second, God willing, why it is that I think that these two kelim, the Mizbach HaKetoret and the Kaporet and the Keruvim, why are these two added on? Now, if we compare the texts of the legislation for the Kaporet and the Mizbach HaKetoret, we could find some analogies. I should have highlighted the analogies, but in any event, I think we could do well. I bolded one of them. If you see here in Pasuk Vav, meaning even the pasuk itself associates the Mizbach HaKetoret, directionally with the kaporet. Right? That Asher Varad Chashama obviously is echoing pasuk Kaf Bet v'nodati lecha sham v'dibarti techa me'al kaporet ben shnei kerubim. V'sipita oto zahav tahor v'asita lo zer zahav sabiv. That we could also find here. Where can we find that? Maybe we can't find that. Okay, in any event, there are a few analogies between the kapor and mizbach ketoret, both on a textual level as well as on a on a legal level. And I would like to suggest that these two are really coming beikvot heta egel, additions to the Mishkan beikvot heta egel, the hivadut ohel moed as a place of menodati lecha shama, is in my opinion a response to heta egel. Now I want to address why these two kelim. In order to do so, I would like to look at I would like to identify. Well, before I do that, why am I saying that the keruvim are in response to Hita Egel? Now, in the rabbinic tradition, it goes without saying that keruvim are human forms, Yenuka, right? In Masechet Sukkah, there's a discussion of we basically we're trying to doresh the size of the the minimum size of the sukkah, and we were doresh it from the kaporet. And basically the Gemara itself brings the kushiyah that here in Yeheskel Aleph we have sorry, in Yeheskel Yod, so if we're saying that if we're saying that the keruvim are people, it's kind of strange that we refer to, one face being keruv, one face being Adam. So the Gemara there is mitaris that the pinah keruv is yenuka, it's a child, and pinah Adam is rubrabaya, it's a adult man. However, if we look at these two pesukim that I brought to you here, we could identify, it seems like we can identify successfully the keruvim as not as a person, but rather as a shor. If you look here, I did highlight here, with mutfenehem, we have four faces here. So in Aleph and Yod, Yehezkel says it's the same. He says that the same vision that I saw here in Har Kebar is what I saw in Perek Yod, Perek Aleph, sorry. So we have Peneh Adam, we have Peneh Aryeh, and we have Peneh Nesher and Peneh Nesher. And now the one difference is we have Peneh Shor in Aleph and Peneh HaKeruv in Yod. And that leads many scholars to suggest that really the keruvim are the form of a shor. I will note that, besides for this proof, which seems pretty conclusive, if we think about the description of the keruvim in the Mishkan, in the Mikdash, it is kind of difficult to imagine a shor being standing with the keruvim as they are. Because they're four-legged creatures. So assuming that the keruvim are a shor, they kind of would have to be standing with their their front legs up, which is kind of hard to imagine, but nonetheless, there are many scholars that do take the position that it's a shor. Now, why is this relevant to us? Because if we're saying that the keruvim are bikvot heta egel, it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because a shor is nothing other than an adult egel. And therefore, if we're saying that the keruvim are coming bikvot heta egel, I think it's self-explanatory why we're putting the shor in the mikdash. Now, this has to do a lot with something that the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi discusses at length in the Kuzari. I don't think we have time right now to get into that, but so that's why I'm suggesting for now that the keruvim and the mizbach ketoret are the additions in light of heta, in response to heta egel. Now I haven't described why yet, and I want to do this based on the first time we find a keruvim in the Torah, and that is after Het Adam Harishon. ויגרש את האדם וישכן מקדם לגן עדן את הכירובים והתלה את החרב מתהפכת לשמור את דרך עץ החיים. We see from this pasuk that in Bereshit the purpose of the keruvim is to guard the derech es haim. If so, I don't think it would be far-fetched to suggest that maybe the kerubim on the aron, on the kaporet as well, have a goal, have a purpose that is similar to guarding after a sin, right? As opposed to, maybe guarding not so that no one can come in, although that does appear later in haremot, right? Lo yavahu b'chol arte lakodesh. But guard in terms of as opposed to trying to have iconoltry in a non-legal manner, guard in terms of direct, meaning to say that the keruvim here, they have one keruv here and one keruv here, and you have a line in the middle. And that line is pointing towards the Aron, pointing to the covenant. And that's my suggestion. Similarly, you could find a similar nature with the Mizbah HaKetoret. What's Mizbah HaKetoret's purpose? It creates a smoke screen. It creates a smoke screen or smoke, depending on different approaches to Mizbah HaKetoret, which I hope to speak about later at a different time. But nonetheless, both of these, accordingly, both have purposes of guarding, both have purposes of taking a step back. And I think in light of Hita Egel, we could understand why we might want to be taking a step back. We might want to have an additional layer of guarding ourselves after a perisa towards God, which was not appropriate. There is more that I want to say, but I want to take a break for a second just to see if anyone has any questions before I continue for the last few minutes that I have. Any questions? Okay, I guess I did a good job explaining because no one has any questions, or a very bad job. But either way, okay. Just to summarize before we move on to the mahut of the Mishkan, we'll basically touch what time is it? 11:05. So Senna told me I have 5. Okay, so I have 5 more minutes. So I guess we'll do a summary and we'll pick up next week with the mahut of the Mishkan, God willing. Just to summarize, we gave a few different, so I'll stop sharing my screen. We gave a few different approaches here to explain the mahut of the Mishkan. There were approach that said the primary purpose of the Mishkan was to house the luchot. A question that we remained with that I haven't yet answered with is, if so, why the korbanot? I suggested very briefly that perhaps you need to have an actual temple in order to house the luchot in the temple, and to define it as a temple, you need to have their avodah. A second approach we suggested was that the main purpose of the Mishkan, as the name suggests, is a place to have Shekhinah within the Mahane Israel. Similarly to the first approach, we have the same question: why korbanot? Then we brought the Ramban, who suggests that the korbanot really aid in the bringing down of the Shekhinah. And one way or another, we suggested really 2 readings of that Ramban, whether that's more of a metaphysical, mechanistic approach, or it's a way to be deserving of God to be Shoreh Shekhinah on us. The third approach we brought was Harambam, which we had some sort of histapkut. We said maybe perhaps it really isn't fair to call it Harambam Shita, but it's nonetheless referred very often to as Harambam Shita. The primary purpose of the Mishkan is a place of avodah, a bet avodah, right? As he says, the mitzvah is to create a place that's mukhan, yot sham makrivim, sham korbanot, and that there's going to be kapsut sham and the regel. Another approach we mentioned was response to the Hita Egel. Within that, we had 2 approaches. One is that it's an edut that God was forgiving of Israel for the Egel, and the other was that it was actually a way like the Gemaran Shekalim, Yavo Zahav of the Kaporet, Bechaper al Zahav of the Hita Egel. Lastly, we discussed the approach of Abarbanel, and the approach that I was suggesting really here, that's not really the same as Abarbanel, but structurally it's similar, that there were really 2 shalavim in the instruction of the Mishkan. I think next year what I want to discuss, if I'm correct that there were 2 shalavim, what was the original purpose and what was the additional layer that I haven't addressed fully yet. But nonetheless, the second layer would be almost a step back, an additional layer of being careful, Bivo el HaKodesh. So I think that's Adkan. And if anyone, I asked a few minutes ago if anyone has any questions, but if any questions were mitadesh in the last few minutes, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Freddie. Thank you for that insightful and interesting presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Freddie before we wrap things up? Don't worry, we'll see him next week as well. So if you think of anything over the course of the week, I'm sure you'll be able to ask him next week, but it's a great opportunity now. Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. So thank you very much, Freddie, once again, and we will see you next week on May the 5th for the next part of this series of the Mishkan and the Korbanot. Thank you very much, Freddie Grunsfeld. Have a great... thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening or day, depending on
Everyone else.
Good night.
Tov.